Everyone talks about the $1 million moment. Newspapers love it, podcasts chase it, and Instagram shows off the trophy life that supposedly follows. But let me cut through the noise the way a shareholder cuts through an earnings call. For most people, the real life-changing threshold isn't $1 million, it's $20,000. When you cross that line, everything shifts, not because the number itself is magical, but because of what it buys you: time, options, and the ability to refuse things that keep you trapped. I know the title leans on the Warren Buffett image for a reason. Think of the Buffett persona: plain-spoken, patient, and painfully aware of how small habits compound. He'd tell you the same blunt thing I'm about to say in his reserved way. Wealth isn't a headline figure. It's the quiet power to choose. When your balance hits that first meaningful cushion, about $20,000, you stop being driven by immediate survival. You start negotiating from a position of dignity instead of desperation. That's the psychological and practical pivot point we'll build the rest of this message around. Picture 2 evenings. First, a Tuesday night in a cramped apartment. The refrigerator is buzzing with yesterday's leftovers. The car light blinks on the dash. A mechanic's voice over the phone says, "It needs a new alternator. I can have it fixed Monday, but it'll be $900. You can hear the grinding in the background, the clock of bills, rent, and overtime ticking down. That $900 isn't just a number. It's the difference between getting to work on Thursday or getting towed and missing a paycheck. For many people, a single shock of that size forces impossible choices. Borrow from a high-fee lender, put the repair on a credit card that grows like a weed, or hope the problem disappears. Now imagine the same scene with a different bank balance. The mechanic gives the same estimate. The hand on the wallet is steady. You drop off the car, pay the bill, and drive home. It's not victory porn, it's simply logistics without panic. That's what I mean by escape velocity. The point where a normal-sized disruption doesn't become a catastrophe. Getting to 20K is like clearing the gravitational well that keeps most people stuck in crisis mode. This isn't nostalgia or an abstract morality tale. It's practical and observable. When your account is perpetually low, your mind becomes a triage unit. Research on scarcity shows that when people worry about scarcity of money, time, or attention, they use mental resources to manage immediate problems, not long-term opportunities. You make poorer decisions not because you're lazy or unwise, but because your cognitive bandwidth is taxed. Stress tightens your horizon. You trade the future for immediate certainty. Hitting that first cushion loosens the chokehold of scarcity. It's not the end of your financial education. It's the beginning of a different kind of decision-making. Before we go deeper, I want you to do something simple and honest. Pause for a second, look at your current savings, and in the comments write your balance rounded to the nearest $100 and one concrete thing you're willing to give up or delay to reach $20,000. It's a small behavioral contract with your future self. No one's judging the number, only the willingness to change it. Back to the mechanics of the shift. Call it refusal power. It sounds dramatic, but it's plain. Refusal power is the ability to say no to the things that would push you back into scarcity. Think about a scene at work. Your boss asks you to take on a weekend project for no extra pay and hints there might be consequences if you refuse. Jack, who has no cushion, says yes. He stays because the risk of losing the job or the next shift is too high. Mike, who has a cushion, call it his small fortune of roughly 20K, asks a few questions, evaluates the real risk, and can either negotiate better terms or politely decline. Mike doesn't walk away to be arrogant. He walks away because he can. That negotiating posture is more valuable than a flashy course or the latest market tip. There's a dignity to negotiating without desperation. A person with a cushion can demand clarity, time, and respect. They can take a day to assess an email that demands immediate decisions. They can test offers because a tested offer leads to better outcomes. That is one of the unadvertised goods of the 20K milestone. It reduces the compulsive yes that poverty breeds. Now let's look at why the dollar base matters from a mathematical perspective. You've probably heard the phrase, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. It's cliché because it's true. A little capital applied patiently can become a large capital over time. But compound interest isn't magic. It's math, and math is brutally indifferent to noise. The crucial rule for most of us is base matters far more than chasing extraordinarily high returns early in the game. Here's a simple way to understand it. Take a constant return, say 10%, and apply it to two different bases. 10% on $1,000 gives you $100 in a year. 10% on $20,000 gives you $2,000 in a year. The percentage is the same. The absolute outcome is wildly different. That's why growing your base, getting to that initial 20K, is a higher leverage move for ordinary savers than hunting for hotter but riskier returns on a tiny balance. A quick tool that helps illustrate doubling is the rule of 72. It's not a prophecy. It's a back of the envelope that tells you roughly how many years it takes for money to double at a given annual return. You divide 72 by the return rate. At 8% annual growth, 72 divided by 8 gives you 9 years to double. At 6%, it's 12 years. Use the rule of 72 not as a promise, but as a mental model. Higher returns cut doubling time, but you need a meaningful base for doubling to matter. Let's run a compact example to bring this alive. Suppose you have $20,000 invested and you earn an average of 7% a year. Use the rule of 72. 72 divided by 7 is about 10, so in roughly 10 years, that balance doubles to $40,000. 10 years after that, it doubles again to $80,000. Another decade, $160,000. You're not guaranteed those numbers. Market returns vary. But the illustration shows why the snowball needs enough snow at the start. Contrast that with $1,000 at the same rate. It takes the same amount of time to double, but each doubling produces much smaller absolute sums. The snowball starts tiny and takes forever to roll into anything meaningful if you never get enough snow. This is also why many eager investors chase higher returns through risky bets early on. A 15% return sounds intoxicating, but if your starting capital is small and the strategy is equivalent to gambling, you're buying volatility, not a reliable escalator. Most ordinary savers are better off building a healthy base than letting simple, low-cost, diversified investments do the heavy lifting. The compounding machine prefers a larger initial stake. Metaphors help here. Picture a snowball rolling down a hill. If it starts as a marble, it may pick up a few flakes and stop in a ditch. If it starts as a softball and rolls down a long, steady hill of compactable snow, it becomes a boulder. The incline length matters, but the initial size matters as much. Wet snow and a long hill is the perfect domestic image. Get enough damp snow at the top, and time will do its work. That's the argument for prioritizing the first 20K over speculative shots. We also have to be honest about the psychological landscape at the moment of crossing the line. Hitting $20,000 is an achievement, and achievements trigger celebration and sometimes self-sabotage. This is the great filter, the moment when your social environment, your impulses, and your own brain conspire to pull you back down. I've seen people hit a cushion, buy a depreciating car, take a lavish trip, and months later be worse off than before. The impulse to reward yourself is natural. The danger is mistaking reward for strategy. Social pressure plays a harder and more subtle role than most people admit. Think of the crab bucket metaphor. In a bucket, crabs pull down any crab trying to climb out. In many social circles, sudden financial progress invites commentary. Some supportive, some resentful. Friends who never talked about budget now suggest upgrades. Family members hint at helping with loans. Acquaintances assume your windfall is permanent. The pressure to signal belongs is real, and the cost of giving in is stealthy but compounding. That's why restraint near the threshold is tactical, not ascetic. Saving is not joyless deprivation when it's practiced for a purpose. It's the price of buying better choices later. When you resist the early consumption impulse, you're not denying pleasure. You're buying the option to choose how you spend when you have agency. This is dignity framed as a financial decision, the ability to show up in life on your own terms. Let me make another practical point here, one that sounds mundane, but separates the few who break out from the many who don't. Small asymmetric investments in yourself often outperform speculative market gambles in terms of lifetime return. I don't mean enrolling in every shiny course that promises instant riches. I mean targeted investments with clear optionality, certifications that unlock a salary band jump, short courses that build a marketable skill, or a concentrated experiment that could double your effective hourly rate. Spending $1,000 to learn a skill that adds $50 an hour to your market value can pay back many times over in a year. Those are asymmetric gambles, limited downside, potentially large upside. There's a humility to this advice. You'll notice I don't promise that any single $1,000 course will transform your career. I'm asking you to think like an investor in yourself. Small, manageable bets with favorable asymmetry. Over time, a string of these bets often compounds with your invested capital and your expanding options. At this point, it's useful to name the simple tactical frame I use with people who have crossed or are about to cross this threshold. Imagine your $20,000 as two things: a bulletproof vest and a squad of soldiers. The vest is the cash cushion, liquid, reliable protection for unexpected hits. The soldiers are invested capital, working quietly for you in broadly diversified instruments that can grow over time. The exact split can vary depending on your situation and temperament, but the logic is consistent. Keep enough immediate protection to prevent shocks from becoming catastrophes, and put enough to work so the machines of compounding and time can begin to matter. That said, our conversation here must include some, let's call them, death pit warnings. There are 3 financial moves ordinary savers tend to fall into that accelerate decline rather than prevent it. First, leverage, borrowing money to finance bets in the market or lifestyle upgrades. Margin and high-interest borrowing amplify loss and anxiety. Second, complex derivatives or speculative financial products sold as shortcuts. For most people, these instruments are not tools. They're micro-taxes on time and attention, and a fast route to ruin if you misjudge them. Third, buying a house too early with too little cash, an emotional purchase disguised as a stability move. Home ownership can be a terrific long-term anchor, but when it strains your liquidity and forces you to borrow for everything else, it becomes a trap. Avoid these paths when your base isn't solid. Let me be clear. I'm not condemning ambition or mortgage-financed life upgrades across the board. I'm saying there's a window where prudence buys options. People who try to shortcut that window with leverage or exotic bets often see their progress evaporate when a predictable storm hits. The 20K moment is where you can step back from those hazards and choose safer, higher-odds strategies that compound over time. At the same time, crossing this boundary is not an endpoint. It's a hinge. What changes are your options and the quality of your decisions. Stress levels fall not because money eliminates life's challenges, but because it changes the terms under which you react to them. A lower cortisol life is a life in which you can negotiate calmly, sleep through a temporary loss, and make plans beyond the next paycheck. That's not hyperbole. It's the pragmatic payoff. We should also talk about timing versus speed. There's a subtle difference between moving quickly to 20K and moving recklessly. Speed is valuable when it's powered by sustainable actions, extra shifts you can maintain, freelance projects that are marketable, intentional spending cuts that don't degrade your health. Recklessness is a credit card binge or a lifestyle inflation sale. The goal is a fast, sane sprint to the cushion, not a burnout firework. You may be thinking, okay, but what if I can't get to 20K? My wages are low and I live in an expensive city. That's a fair point. And the honest answer is that circumstances matter. But agency still exists within constraints. People in tight circumstances who find the path upward usually do three things together. They increase income in some way, overtime, side work, a credential. They shrink non-essential spending without wrecking social or mental health. And they create friction around expenses, delayed purchases, pre-commitment rules. None of those things are glamorous, but combined, they create progress. The Buffett-like discipline here is simple: margin over style, persistence over cleverness, and the slow accumulation of options. We've covered why $20,000 matters: the psychological cushion, the mathematical leverage for compounding, the refusal power at work and in negotiations, and the real hazards that appear at the threshold. I want to pause and let this land for a moment, because the next section, the part I'll pick up from here, moves into the behavioral and tactical playbook. How to allocate the first 20K in concrete terms, how to handle the celebration reflex, the social pull of the crab bucket, and the small high-probability investments in yourself that tend to pay off. Before we shift into that playbook, however, there's an important human vignette to tie the ideas together. An example you'll recognize if you've ever had to choose between short-term peace and long-term dignity. It's the story of two neighbors, not to shame anyone, but to make the concept of refusal power tangible. They rented side by side in a building that leaked in the rain. Marcus had zero saved and treated each paycheck like a tightrope. One misstep and he'd fall. He bought what he needed to get by and rarely said no to his friends' requests. Because refusing felt like risking social bonds he couldn't afford to lose, he took every overtime shift he could, and he accepted small loans from well-meaning relatives, which came with unspoken expectations. One year, his furnace failed in November. Without savings, he used a payday loan, high fees, quick relief. Months later, his debt had doubled. He worked harder, felt more trapped, and his horizon shrank. Next door was Lena. She started with the same income baseline. She made different choices, a modest cut in dining out, a side gig she genuinely enjoyed that added a few $100s a month, and a rule that windfalls, birthday money, tax returns, went straight into savings until she hit 20. When the furnace died in November, Lena paid cash. She negotiated with the landlord for a partial replacement, calmly arranged a temporary heater, and slept without the knotted anxiety that had pulled Marcus into an emergency loan. Neither story is heroic. Neither is miraculous. They are arithmetic and habit meeting reality. The difference was not privilege as much as the presence of a cushion that made options visible. That visibility is what I want to return to. Money at this level buys you the sight line to different choices. It doesn't eliminate problems, it makes them manageable. We're at a natural point to do two things. Make space for a practical split of the $20K into the vest and the soldiers with exact guidance, and then walk through the behavioral traps that threaten progress at the threshold. In the next section, I'll lay out a clear rule of thumb allocation for most people that balances liquidity and growth. Concrete small bets you can make on yourself that preserve upside, and the checklist of things to avoid when your base is fragile. I'll also show the math in a little more detail. What happens if you let your soldiers compound for a decade versus what happens if you spend the cushion early? But before we get there, take that short commitment I asked earlier. In the comments, round your savings to the nearest $100 and name one thing you'll delay or sacrifice to reach $20,000. Promise it to your future self. That promise, small, public, and concrete, matters because progress is built on repeated, visible agreements between your present self and your future self. When you come back, we'll move from why $20,000 shifts everything to how you protect it, how you put it to work without turning it into an accident, and how to pass the psychological great filter that hits right after the breakthrough. For now, hold that image of the snowball at the top of the hill. The wet snow is gathering, the slope is long, and you're standing at the rim deciding whether to roll it or melt it. So here's the playbook, clear, practical, and intentionally boring. How to treat the first $20,000 so it does what it's supposed to do. Think of it as stagecraft for your finances. Arrange the props so the scene never collapses when a gust of life blows through. The basic idea is simple and non-glamorous. Protect enough liquid capital to prevent ordinary shocks from becoming crises, and put enough to work so that time and steady returns can start to matter. The recommended split I use with people looks like this. Carve out a bulletproof vest of cash and cash-like reserves, somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 for most people, and give the rest to quiet, diversified market exposure, the soldiers that will begin to compound. The exact numbers shift with your circumstances, but the posture is universal. Protect first, then grow. Why that vest range? Because liquidity is not the same thing as wealth. Having $20,000 parked in a complicated investment you can't touch without penalties is a false victory. When a car lights up the dash or the boiler dies, access matters. If you are single with a stable job and no dependents, a $5,000 cushion might be enough to stop the immediate panic. If you rent in a volatile market, have kids, or irregular income, aim toward $10,000, the higher end of the vest, because unpredictable expenses multiply quickly. The vest is there to keep you from borrowing at terrible rates, to give you the space to negotiate, and to preserve your dignity when things break. That is its whole job. It's deliberately boring capital, high liquidity, low risk, and psychologically priceless. What about the soldiers? Those are the dollars you let join the long game. For the typical saver who hits 20K, sending 10 to 15K to broadly diversified market exposure, index funds that track large swaths of the market, is a reasonable starting move. I'm not telling you to chase the shiniest name on a brokerage homepage or to trade like you're surfing volatility for thrills. The point is simple. You want exposure to many businesses, industries, and cycles, so one company's bad quarter doesn't ruin your plan. Over time, diversity plus time reduces the tyranny of individual outcomes. Let the soldiers do what soldiers do. Hold ground and advance slowly, reliably, and without drama. A practical tactic here is to create two accounts that you name plainly Vest and Soldiers. Automate the transfers so that when you get paid, a fixed amount goes to the Vest until it reaches the target, and another fixed amount goes into the Soldiers each month. The automation cuts the internal argument out of the equation. Humans are impulsive. Automation is a mild, kind form of self-discipline. Now let's work through a few scenarios so you can see the arithmetic with your own eyes. Imagine you hit $20,000 and split it into $8,000 for the Vest and $12,000 for the Soldiers. You leave the $12,000 invested and contribute a modest sum each month, say $300 to the Soldiers, and the market returns roughly 7% on average over long periods. After 10 years, that combination of starting capital, monthly additions, and compound growth will likely produce many tens of thousands more than the same period with no contributions. If, instead, you scoff at steady contributions and spend the $20,000 on a depreciating asset, you lose both the money and the optionality that comes with it. The numbers are not mystical. They simply reward patience and steady input. If you want a slightly more aggressive blueprint for hitting the next milestone, $100,000, here's something realistic with math included, so it's not just cheerleading. Start with $20,000 invested, add $375 per month, about $4,500 per year. Assume a long-term average return of 7%. Again, an illustrative scenario, not a forecast. In roughly 10 years, that combination gets you close to $100,000. That's the combination I call dual engines: compounding, the machine, plus active income that you channel into investments. Without the monthly contributions, relying on compounding alone to move from 20K to 100K could take 2 decades. With steady, manageable contributions, you can compress that timeline dramatically. If you can increase those contributions through a side hustle, a credential that lifts your wage, or overtime, you accelerate further. The arithmetic rewards predictable, repeatable action more than high-variance chases. Those predictable actions include targeted, asymmetric bets on yourself. Remember the $1,000 examples I mentioned earlier. Those are not feel-good anecdotes, but intentional strategies. Spend $1,000 on a course or certification that gives you a license to charge more, or on a short practical boot camp that meaningfully improves your market reach. The key is to treat these expenses like tradable investments. Estimate your potential upside conservatively. If learning a new skill could plausibly add even $10 per hour to your rate and you work 1,000 billable hours, the investment pays back quickly. The downside is small, time and the upfront fee, while the upside is multiplicative and persistent. Those asymmetric bets, stacked judiciously, behave like options. Limited downside, meaningful upside. Now, we need to address the 3 death pits by name and explain why they are so dangerous at this stage. First, leverage. Borrowing to invest or borrowing to live above your means is seductive because leverage magnifies gains. It also magnifies pain. When markets move against you or your income dips, leverage converts a recoverable setback into a cascade. Ordinary savers are rarely in positions to manage the risk that leverage requires, both financially and emotionally. Margin calls, interest compounding on carry, and the stress that comes with those obligations are not path to agency. They are chains disguised as accelerators. Second, complex financial products, options, exotic derivatives, leveraged ETFs, sold as shortcuts. These are technical instruments that, in sophisticated hands, can be useful hedges or tools. For most people trying to build a base, they are unnecessary and often camouflaged risk. They tax understanding, attention, and temperament. If you are not deeply fluent in how they work and what can go wrong, stay away. Your early years of capital accumulation are not the time to learn risky instruments with money you need for safety and future opportunities. Third, the premature home purchase financed with too little cash and too much optimism. Home ownership can be transformational over decades, but it can also be a liquidity trap for someone whose cushion is thin. A house brings maintenance, unexpected repairs, property taxes, and the occasional month without tenants or without a working furnace. If buying a home means wiping out your vest or borrowing to cover normal operating shocks, the house becomes a liability to your agency, not the anchor you hoped for. Wait until you have a stable income, a meaningful cushion post-down payment, and an honest accounting of ongoing costs before you commit. This is not anti-home rhetoric. It's pragmatism. If you buy right and at the right time, home ownership can be part of a long-term plan. If you buy under financial stress, the house often magnifies that stress. Let's return to the psychological fight you will face at the $20K threshold, the great filter. This is where people stumble. The moment you cross a meaningful finish line, the brain searches for reward. Friends, family, and even strangers will supply reasons to celebrate, and none of that is wrong. The trick is to balance celebration with strategy. A few practical rituals help here. Declare a temporary rule for windfalls. For example, automatically allocate 50% of any bonus to the vest until you hit $10K, 30% to soldiers, and 20% for a modest celebration. Naming the rule and announcing it, ideally publicly or to an accountability partner, turns impulse into policy. Policy is easier to obey than emotion. Then there's the crab bucket social problem. When you start climbing, some people will pull you back out of envy, fear, or a desire to restore the group equilibrium. You will get invitations and suggestions that sound like concern, but are actually pressured to spend. You'll hear, "You've made it, treat yourself," when treat yourself might be the worst financial decision for your future. A practical approach. Rehearse short, neutral responses that preserve relationships without giving in. Say things like, "Thanks. I'm saving for something specific right now," or I'm keeping things simple for a little while. Let's plan something low-key. You don't owe anyone a financial report, and you don't need permission to protect your future. Protecting your money is not rejection of your friends. It's an act of self-governance. Another tool against the great filter is visible commitments that create friction for spending. Use separate accounts for the vest, the soldiers, and a small labeled fun account. When your vacation fund is visible and modest, you can still celebrate, but you won't swallow your vest in one weekend. If you want to be more sophisticated, create a simple rule. Any discretionary spend over a defined threshold, say $500, requires a 72-hour delay and a short checklist. Does this align with my 1-year and 5-year goals? Can I afford this without dipping into the vest? Will I regret this purchase when I'm richer? The delay is the friend of prudence. Emotion drives spending. Delay introduces reflection. Accountability matters too. Publicly committing to a savings goal on social media, in a group chat, or in the comments below creates a small social cost to backsliding. Earlier, I asked you to write your current balance and one sacrifice you're willing to make. That was not a rhetorical flourish. It is the simple behavioral technique investors use. Make the decision visible and repeatable. If you can, pair that public commitment with an accountability partner who checks in monthly. Progress compounds when behavior is reinforced. We should also talk about cadence and milestones. Don't let the $100,000 figure be the first milestone you name after 20K. Build micro goals, reach the vest target, maintain it for 6 months, hit a soldier's threshold, say 25K invested, then increase monthly contributions. Celebrate small wins in modest ways so you don't treat milestones as permits to regress. The math benefits from continuity. Every month you contribute, even a small amount, you shorten the path materially. On the income side, think in terms of optionality. The most reliable way to speed from 20K to the next rung is not gambling in markets, but increasing the numerator, your income. That doesn't always mean a new job. It can mean a small consulting side gig, a freelancing project, a micro business, or learning a certification that yields a step up in rate. Prioritize income streams that are scalable and compatible with your life. If a side hustle costs you time and energy you don't have, it's not scalable. If it leverages a skill you already possess and can scale incrementally, it can be powerful. When you evaluate opportunities, think like an investor. What is the upfront cost? What is the likely upside? And what is the chance this effort compounds into ongoing higher rates? Favor those with high asymmetry. Alongside improving income, never underestimate the power of small, non-debilitating expense reductions. A few modest shifts, switching a subscription, rethinking a car lease, cooking more at home a few nights a week, often frees up hundreds of dollars per month that can be devoted to contributions. Don't make deprivation the identity. Make adjustments that are sustainable and not likely to cause social or mental harm. The long game is not about suffering. It's about reallocating resources for greater future freedom. Now let me put a human face on the tactical steps because people remember scenes more than lists. There's a friend I know, call him Daniel, who hit the $20,000 mark and did something nearly everyone should consider. He printed a simple list and taped it above his desk. It read, Protect 1, liquidity, 2, income, 3, optionality. Every time he thought about buying something impulsive, he looked at the list. He automated $200 a month to the vest until it reached $8,000 and $200 a month to low-cost index exposure. When a tempting purchase came up, the list nudged him. 3 years later, Daniel had not only kept his vest intact, but had built a modest side business that doubled his monthly savings rate. The stupidity of the list is its simplicity. Attentional nudges beat good intentions more often than not. One more practical exercise I want you to keep in your pocket. Run 3 what-if scenarios for your life at 1, 5, and 10 years with a simple spreadsheet or even a mental calculation. Ask, if I keep contributing X per month and the market returns Y average, where will I be? What if I add Z in yearly side income and keep contributions steady? Don't fixate on precise forecasts. Use the scenarios to make choices sensible and incremental. Planning is not prophecy. It's a way of organizing choices to favor higher probability outcomes. Before I wrap, I want to return to the emotional payoff, because numbers alone don't sell discipline, feeling does. The real value of this 20K hinge isn't exotic returns, it's quieter mornings, it's fewer phone calls that start with panic, it's the ability to sleep when an invoice is late, to take a week for a job search without panicking, to say no to a toxic overtime culture, and to say yes to things that truly move you. That lowered cortisol, that space between stimulus and reaction, those are the returns that don't show up nicely on a balance sheet, but change the quality of a life. This is where the Buffett-like patience matters. Wealth is often the product of repeated, unexciting decisions delivered over time. People want the tweetable success, the headline, the overnight miracle. The truth I'd bet my reputation on is more humble. Build a bulletproof vest, field a squad of soldiers, invest in your capacity to earn, and refuse the distractions that turn options into regrets. Let compounding do what it does best. Let your additional effort amplify it. Don't use the cushion as an excuse to leap toward conspicuous upgrades. Use it as the platform to buy optionality and dignity. One last practical list, spoken plainly as a checklist you can carry in your head when the next decision appears. Keep your vest liquid and replenished. Automate contributions to soldiers. Make small asymmetric bets on yourself, not on complex financial instruments. Avoid leverage until your base is significantly larger and you fully understand the risks. Delay major lifestyle upgrades until your ongoing income and liquidity reinforce the decision. Create simple pre-commitments for windfalls, and cultivate a couple of steady income engines you can rely on. These steps are not glamorous, but they are the scaffolding of freedom. If you have read this far, here's a short, specific behavioral contract I want you to make with me and with yourself. Go back to the comment you left earlier. Yes, that one where you wrote your rounded balance and one thing you'd give up, and pin it somewhere you can find it easily. Then, in the months ahead, treat that pin as a test of character and discipline. When you reach $20,000, come back to that comment thread and reply, "I did it." Tell your future self and tell anyone who saw the pledge. That small act of public follow-through is a powerful ritual. It transforms a private intention into a witnessed fact. Everything shifts when you clear that well, not because 20,000 is sacred numerology, but because it is the point where choices stop being reactive and start being deliberative. It is the hinge between scrambling and strategy, between saying yes out of fear and saying no from a place of dignity. Keep that in view. Protect the vest, field the soldiers, make smart small bets on yourself, and resist the urge to prove your success to the people who don't value what you're building. The aim is not to flaunt wealth. It's to trade the tyranny of immediate scarcity for the quiet autonomy of time and options. So here's my last ask. Keep this simple framework on hand. When a decision comes, test it against the vest and soldier's logic. If it threatens the vest or weakens your soldiers without a clear, high-probability benefit, pause. If it reinforces the vest or the soldiers, act. And when you reach the milestone, come back here and say those 3 words. I did it. Nothing fancy, just evidence that the plan worked for you. That will be a better headline than any $1 million myth.